Good evening and welcome to the EKU Alumni Spotlight Series. I am your host, Stan McBride, Associate Vice President for Development and Alumni Engagement here at EKU. And before we get to tonight's very distinguished guests, a couple of announcements, a couple of upcoming programs that I want to let you know about. You can put them on your calendar and hopefully remember to join us. The first is the Colonel's Kitchen. Our next episode of the Colonel's Kitchen will come up on Wednesday, the 28th of April. That is a week from tomorrow night. It will be at 8 p.m. And on this episode, we have a very special Kentucky Derby edition of the Colonel's Kitchen. So we'll be working up some favorites from the Kentucky Derby and some special foods that are affiliated with the Derby and connected to the Derby. So we hope you will join us. Dana Bush will be my co-host for that. And of course, Chef Sang will be in the kitchen doing all the cooking. And it should be a great show and a lot of fun. That will be a week from tomorrow night at 8 p.m., our next edition of the Colonel's Kitchen. I also want to let you know about our next episode of the Alumni Spotlight Series. That will actually come up a few weeks from now on May 11th, Tuesday night, May 11th at 7 p.m. This will be our final Alumni Spotlight Series episode of the season, and it will be featuring our Alumni Board President, past and future, or current and future, Amy Jo Gable, who is ending up back-to-back terms as the Alumni Board President. Her term will end June 30th, and Bob Sullivan, who is our President-elect, will take over July 1. We will have both of those folks join us for the Alumni Spotlight Series on the 11th, and we'll talk about the Alumni Board, what it does, how it works, and how they are working for you as alums of Eastern Kentucky University. As I mentioned, that's going to be our final Alumni Spotlight Series for the season. We are going to take a break over the summer months. I know with the weather getting warmer and restrictions loosening up a little bit, folks are getting out and doing more things. So we're going to take a hiatus over the summer months, and then we will be back in August with more episodes of the Alumni Spotlight Series. So be watching for those. And also, we're going to do a Colonel's Kitchen. We'll do next week's, and then we'll do one in May, and then it will take a hiatus for the summer as well. So be watching for more information on those programs coming up very soon. Now, let's talk about tonight's guest. I'm very excited about tonight's guest. She received her bachelor's in social work from EKU in 1977, went on to do master's and doctoral work at Syracuse University. She is a first-generation student and a Fulbright scholar, a former senior advisor and foreign service specialist with the U.S. State Department. She served on the EKU Alumni Board from 2017 to 2020, and she currently serves on the EKU Foundation Board. We are very happy tonight to have Dr. Deborah Alexander as our guest here on the Alumni Spotlight Series. Good evening, Dr. Alexander.
Hi, I'm looking forward to the conversation.
I am too, and you and I had the chance to talk a little bit last week, and I was familiar with some of your work, but not nearly all of it, and there is a lot. I mean, a long distinguished career, 44 years working with the State Department. There's a lot of memories and a lot of miles traveled. Do you have frequent flyer points that are just through the roof?
I don't. I wish I did. I made sure to use those up.
Yeah, I don't blame you one bit. Now, you've lived in D.C., you've lived in New York, obviously. You're back in Lexington now, but your roots are right here in Central Kentucky, right?
That's correct. Yeah, my family's both my mother and father's side of the family's from Jackson County, Estill, Madison County.
So EKU was familiar with you then when you started to think about where you wanted to go to college?
It was familiar to me, although I'm not sure if that was the reason I made the decision initially. I certainly knew of EKU, though, and had driven by it often on family visits. I think the reason I chose EKU, really there's probably three reasons. One is I did not want to come to a school that was all white. I went to a high school in Lexington where it was a terrifically integrated school. And that was one of the things when I went around and looked at schools, I wanted to make sure that there were a lot of different kinds of people, particularly Black and white students. And EKU had that. I had friends coming from Lexington to EKU, so that was a nice connection. And it was a family connection too. I knew that if I needed family, there'd be a whole lot of them not far away. And I wasn't interested in UK, too close to mom and dad. And so EKU made sense because it gave me a little bit of distance, But also, again, if I needed them or if I needed to go home for laundry or a good meal, I knew that they weren't far away.
As you think back about EKU at that time, what are some of your memories as you first arrived on the EKU campus as a new student?
Well, I come from a modest, working class family. And so just the idea of going to college was really mind blowing for me. There hadn't been anybody in my family had gone to college, and I never had been on a college campus until I actually started going around and looking at schools. And so for me, it was rarefied environment. It was like, oh my gosh, people who study, who teach for a living. I can remember that sense of awe that I had for any college, but particularly EKU. I remember just wandering around. As I said, I'd driven by, my family was nearby, but I had never been on campus. And so the opportunity to actually visit and go into the dorms and actually sneak into a couple of classrooms, I can still remember that sense of awe and the fact that I might be here in the future. And then I have so many memories of the first couple of years that I was here. I mean, it was such an exciting time. Vietnam War was ending. It was civil rights movement, women's rights. I can remember the ravine in the springtime. Oh, I just have such great memories of sitting there and studying. And it was the exciting time of streaking. And when I think about my first couple of years at EKU, I always remember streaking. I think my freshman year I was at Case, which I know no longer exists.
It's now a
But I
dining
remember
hall.
the girls, we would sit up in windows, in the evenings. And so there'd be we sort of got heads up that there might be some streakers going by that night. And so we would sit up and we would have pieces of paper and we would write ratings on that streaker was, oh, that's a 4, not even worth looking at the window for. Oh, that was definitely an 8. Yay! So I remember that the first year. So those were good memories of the extracurricular times of EKU. And of course, I loved all my classes.
Yeah, and talk a little bit about you were a social work major. As you came to college, what was that major? What made you select that, and kind of where were you hoping it would send you?
I was committed early on to trying to make a difference in the world, I guess. I'm a kid I was young, but it still must have sunk into me, President Kennedy's words about service to your country.
Yeah.
And so I can never remember a time where I really didn't want to do something that was service to my country. And I was particularly committed, and I think this comes from the times also, but I was particularly committed to social justice and equity issues. And so it seems as though social work was a place for me to start, to find a path to make a difference in what I really cared about.
Now, your sophomore year, you got the opportunity to study abroad, and that was, I'm sure, a life-changing experience. Tell us a little bit about how that came about.
I know. It changed everything for me. I had a professor of religion, and he was also the chaplain there at EKU, Dr. George Norgulin.
Mm-hmm.
And I think I also I think I was doing a work study, and part of my assignment, my work study program was working at the chapel for a few hours a week as well. And he must have seen something in me, to this day. But he was such a terrific mentor and coach. And I remember clearly him saying, there's this Fulbright scholarship, and I think you would be terrific for it. I think you should apply. And that was like telling me that I could walk on the moon tomorrow. I couldn't even imagine the opportunity to study abroad. And I certainly couldn't imagine. I knew about Fulbright, And to me, again, such a prestigious thing to even think about. But he kept encouraging me, and I applied for it, and of course had to do an essay and had to do interviews. And I can remember to this day, I had gone to visit family up in Ohio. I was visiting my grandmother, who at that point was quite elderly, and she had one of those old party telephone lines. You remember when you had several
Yeah.
people on a party line? I know I'm dating myself here, but party line, and she got a phone call from someone at EKU, and there were other people on the line, and she kept saying, "Get off the line. This is for my granddaughter's got to get on. She got an important phone call." And I remember, and it was, Dr. Norgalen saying, "Well, pack your bags. You're going to India."
Wow.
I know.
Yeah,
Still
and then
thinking about it.
the experience of a lifetime, getting to go and do an internship with Mother Teresa of all people. I mean, that's just
I know.
hard to even fathom, because people hear about Mother Teresa all the time, but you not only got to hear about her, you got to be with her and got to know her. Tell us about that.
Yeah, I have these memories of her. She's, she was such a petite person, and not an easy person to get to know. And I was very lucky in some ways because the Kennedy family had donated a beautiful old, you remember those, I think they used to be called Woodies. They were these station wagons that had like the wood paneling on the side.
Yeah,
They had
yeah.
donated one of those to the Missionaries of Charity, which was Mother Teresa's charity. And but the sisters couldn't drive it. And so I immediately, when she understood that I was American and that I had a driver's license, she asked me if I would be the person that would drive her each morning. So that, just pure luck, gave me an opportunity to each morning start the day with her and to drive around with her. And it was a daunting experience, but again, life changing for me. And she, she assigned me to the lepers colony. So who would imagine that a young girl with, Kentucky roots, here I am in Calcutta, India, going each morning to feed and care for and talk with those who had a disease that honestly I had only heard about from our Bible studies at church,
Mhm.
who knew about leprosy. And also I was exposed to all of Calcutta. We drove the streets, providing care for those who were on the streets. And so it was such a wonderful experience. But also I went to classes in the afternoon. So life changing so many ways. And I can remember when I'd left India, and she walked out with me and held my hand. I still to this day can remember that small hand in mine, and knowing that I probably would never see her again. And it was, I'm so grateful for that opportunity. And then years later, when I was visiting Kentucky back in my New York days, I found out that there was a small order of Mother Teresa's nuns that serve in Eastern Kentucky. And I've also met them. I met them in Afghanistan, and I've met them in many other places. And so that experience has stayed with me, but it's also opened doors and created new friendships around the world as I have met some of the other sisters.
For most people to be able to say that they did that and they helped feed lepers and they worked with Mother Teresa, that right there would be a great career accomplishment, a life accomplishment. But there's so much more after that we're going to get to. I mean, it's incredible. Talk about how that changed you when you came back to Kentucky, and now you're back at EKU. You've been through that experience. It had to change your whole perspective.
Well, what's really interesting about it is it changed my perspective. I was always interested in travel. Even as a child, I can remember, many times I would run away from home and pack up a little peanut butter sandwich and imagine that I was going to find my way in some other country. So, invariably I would come home by the time the sun was setting. But so the idea of travel, even though I had never traveled, never been on a plane, didn't even have a suitcase. It was an EKU professor, God love him, who took me to Kmart to get my first suitcase. And I didn't even have a camera, bought me that one too. Thank goodness for my professors who saw this as an experience and sort of held me up and helped me, make that plane. But I came back and I was very, very interested in international development and in diplomacy and in doing work, realizing that, social justice issues, poverty issues, healthcare issues, policies that I was really focused on at the time, it wasn't only about Kentucky, it wasn't only about the United States, it was about the world. Wherever I've gone in the world, I find people are pretty much the same. They care about their children, they care about their children having school, they care about clean water, they care about safety. And so coming back from India really made that point to me that we are so much the same, and that these kinds of policies that I wanted to work on could be Kentucky, it could be India, it could be Afghanistan. And so that changed me. The interesting thing, is that I really didn't get a chance to do much international. I married soon after I got back and then moved to New York, and I went to graduate school. And so my career took a very different direction than international development. But the great thing about it is when you get to be my age and you're old enough, I think of my life as chapters. And eventually my life, I got to that chapter where I had the opportunity to go back to those seeds that had been planted by their interest in international development.
People watching this might think, how does someone go from EKU to working for the State Department? And as you mentioned, you go to New York, and it kind of all started when you were living in Syracuse. At least that's how the State Department found you, right?
You're so right about that. I was at that point, once I went to Syracuse, I went to graduate school, and I started working for government, and again, I had always seen government as a target for my career because I was interested in policy. How do we make real changes in our world? And I felt like working on policy would be a way that I could help make some real difference in our world. So my very first job was with the State Attorney General's office, and I was an investigator on the mob doing for bid rigging on the mob. And that sort of was my foot in to government service. And then from the Attorney General's office, I ended up becoming head of constituent services for the Speaker of the New York State Assembly. And then I also did neighborhood services. I was coordinator for neighborhood services for one of the mayors. And out of that, I had a real interest, again, in policy. But how is it that we elect people that care about the policies that we care about, or that's committed to change? And so I got very interested in elections. And out of that experience, I eventually became deputy commissioner for elections in the Syracuse area. And that was the experience that eventually opened the door to State Department. There had been the war in Bosnia and the fall of the Berlin Wall, and there were these major changes going on in Eastern and Central Europe. And State Department diplomats typically hadn't worked in government. They didn't have to rebuild a government or build a multi-party country. And so State Department needed somebody that actually knew something. How do you work in government? How do you do a budget? How do you elect candidates? How do candidates compete? How do you write fair election law? So I got a phone call early one morning, 6 a.m. I remember it well. And of course, when you get a call that early, you think, oh, emergency. And I remember
something's wrong. Yeah.
And it was Colonel so-and-so. And I'm like, uh-oh, what have I done? And he says he's calling from the U.S. State Department. And would I be interested in coming to Washington to talk to them? And so that was really the beginning.
And certainly your career has had a lot of different facets and a lot of different areas that you've worked on. But fair and free elections, I think, is something that has kind of stuck with you throughout your career. No matter where you've gone, you've kind of that's been one of the themes, right?
It has been. And it's been that whether it was Bosnia or Afghanistan or Iraq, the opportunity to all those countries that are in conflict or countries that are undergoing a change of government. One of the first things we want to do is help them elect new leadership. And that brings stability to a country. And so that's really a building block for a country that's going through any kind of turmoil or conflict. And so it was really that experience that allowed me to serve in a number of other countries because elections were so important to them in starting to establish that sort of stable building block.
So, as let's call you an elections expert, I think you certainly qualify for that. You completely understand the value of elections, and I think you and I talked a little bit about people in other countries who have never had the freedoms that we have and had elections. Their appreciation for it is just something that is inspiring to see.
It is. I think I may have told you the story. If not, I remember in the 2004 elections in Afghanistan, it was the first presidential election that country had ever had. And there were so many naysayers about the fact that they're not ready for elections. They don't understand democracy. They don't understand voting. And we had worked hard after passing a constitution, had worked hard, we being a coalition of countries, not only the US and not only Afghan government, but a coalition of countries in trying to help the people of Afghanistan understand the importance of elections and voting. But they were familiar with it. We oftentimes underestimate people. They know what voting's about. They know it's about electing their representatives. And I remember that morning, I was in the central highlands of Afghanistan, the mountainous area. And I was that day going to be flying to a number of different provinces just to oversee how the elections are going. And I had a couple of the military commanders with me, and we were really ready to respond if there were any kinds of problems or whatever the issues might be, sort of a quick reaction team. And it was an area called Bamiyan, which is in the Central Highlands, and it's where the famous Buddha statues were that the Taliban had decimated right before our 9/11 attacks. And the people early in the morning where I was staying, I got up and got dressed and started going out to the polling station. And I was amazed at the very long lines. And we're talking 3, 4 o'clock in the morning, and people had already turned out to vote. Hundreds of people, men and women. And so anybody that says people don't understand elections, those people knew how critical that was. And I remember stopping and talking to women. In Afghanistan, the polling places are segregated. So you have polling places for women and for men, oftentimes the same building, but different entrances. And I remember stopping and talking to women, and many of them were dressed in white. And I would say to them, is this special dressing, or, what is this? And several of the women said to me, we expected to be killed today for voting. We've never been allowed to vote. So we got up this morning and we bathed and we put on our best clothes to die in. Now, if that doesn't tell you how, you know, what that franchise means. And I had these experiences. I had that experience in Somalia. I had it in Bosnia. I had it in Ukraine. And any place I've been in the world, the right to vote, people take it seriously. And it is, it really drives home how important it is. And I just wish in our country, people realized both the responsibility and the privilege of that.
Yeah, and so I would think, as someone who has such a great appreciation for elections and the electoral process, that the last presidential election we had here in the States had to make you happy and proud because of the great turnout. Finally, great turnout, and finally we gave voters a lot of access.
Yeah, no, it was so interesting time to be back here in the US and sort of see, I guess that's a silver lining to the pandemic, right? Is that it forced, typically government officials, like many, sort of drag their heels on reform. If you know how to do something one way, you're a little hesitant to maybe change it. But the pandemic did force us to have to make changes, because the only way that we could conduct elections was if we didn't have people crowding in polling places, and we had to be able to give people who were vulnerable to COVID-19 options about how to cast their ballot. So it did force us, not only Kentucky, but many other states, but it did force us to expand mail-in balloting opportunities, early voting, which I love, the fact it's always been a bit of mystery. I understand because it's in our Constitution, but we only have one day on
Mhm.
Tuesday. And I love the fact that you could cast a ballot, go into your polling place or into a place, be able to cast a ballot early. And we had boxes that you could drop ballots in early, mail in. So yeah, those expanded options were terrific.
You have been in Bosnia, Pakistan, Kosovo, Serbia, Croatia. The list goes on and on. I could spend the rest of the show just listing the
A
countries.
nomad, a nomad.
But your longest stint, I believe, was in Afghanistan, and that's where you finished out your career, I think, and were the longest serving U.S. diplomat in Afghanistan, I think, when you left there. Is that right?
That's true. That's true. So it wasn't my plan. And that's what I found, that's true of life, right? That life doesn't always go according to plans. And that's one of the important things I also learned at EKU, is that you have a plan about where you think your education's going to go. And then you get an opportunity to go overseas, and you come back, and you have some different interests. And the same thing with career plans, they change, doors open, windows close. And I didn't expect, when I went to Afghanistan, I thought I'd be there for 3 months to set up the new embassy and to help start the new Agency for International Development mission. And it ended up being that I was one of the only women. And as turns out, my mother was a Army civilian, retired, and both my dad and stepdad were Army vets. And not far from EKU, there was a Bluegrass Army depot, and I knew people there, and I had cousins and kinfolk who had served in the Army. And I wasn't afraid of Army folks. And it was surprising how many folks are uncomfortable. But they needed someone that would sort of be liaison between the U.S. Embassy and U.S. military forces, NATO forces. And so I sort of, within actually a week, the U.S. ambassador said, "Would you be willing to get on a helicopter and go meet with some special forces folks on some projects out there?" And that was about 2 years before I came back.
you,
I had a number of other
obviously,
assignments, you're right, while I was there.
and certainly Afghanistan has been in the news a lot lately. So
Yeah,
you had a lot of experience there, and certainly know that country and that area as well as anybody, I would think. Um, so I'm sure you're watching the news at least with great interest as developments continue there.
I have been. There's not a good answer to how war ends. Wars don't end neatly with, people sitting down at a table and they sign some sort of a peace agreement. They sort of linger and they start over again. There's been a number of times where you think a war is over, the conflict's finished, and it starts again. And so, I'm not the first to say that war is hell, war is messy. And I my opinion is that it's probably time to finish the withdrawal of our U.S. forces. We had started that. In fact, I was on the planning team back in 2011 and 12 and 13 to bring our U.S. troops home. We were starting at that point, the withdrawal. At the time then, we had over 100,000 U.S. soldiers, and we had another 30 to 40,000 NATO soldiers in country. And so actually, even though there's been a lot of focus just in the last week with President Biden's decision, the withdrawal had started a decade ago, and this will be just really the final phase of that withdrawal. So I am really delighted, though, that U.S. is not leaving our mission there, even though our military forces won't be there. But the U.S. Embassy, which I was a part of from the very beginning, still stands. Our diplomats, our intelligence officers, our development people will still be there. The mission of education, the mission of women's rights, the mission of rule of law will still go on, and we'll still have military assets in the region. So our counterterrorism will go on. So the work continues.
You know, you have lived in mud tents, and then you also have served alongside diplomats and military leaders and heads of state. And you even in your career have had times where your life was in danger.
That's true. You know, I don't think about those risks very often. And I think that's, again, another life lesson is that you have to be willing to take risk, and not risk that you haven't thought a little bit about, but calculated risk. And I would have never made career changes had I not been willing to take those risks. I made changes, you know, when I was at the Board of Elections in New York, and I got that call, you know, asking me if I would go to Bosnia, of all places. And the Bosnia had just signed a peace agreement. Fighting was still going on. But you take these risks. And I have been very fortunate that in most of the places, not all of them, but a lot of the places that I've served, like Bosnia, like Kosovo, Iraq, Afghanistan, we've had U.S. forces there too. So I always felt as though that, you know, my guys and gals had my back. And it was a risk that I was willing to take. And I mean, I have been richly rewarded with a career that I couldn't have even imagined. So, but I have, you know, there has been, I'm a survivor of 3 bombings. I've been in gunfire. I've been in firefights. I've been in earthquakes, you know. I don't have regrets of those. And I feel very fortunate and blessed that I survived those.
One of the themes that seems to kind of carry through your career to me is about information, making sure that people have access to information, and also about participation. But those seem to be the kind of the themes that have run through your entire career.
That's nice of you to say that. I think that is true. I mean, when I think about government and making government better, part of really central to that, I guess, is that means we as people have to help make it better. And that means that we have to participate. And it also means that we have to get good information, and we have to know how to find credible information and legit information. And boy, that's become really difficult in recent years with so many different sources of information. But I do think that our responsibility as citizens is to seek out diverse news sources, to seek out information, and to give information. I always found, I mean, I don't think diplomacy is much different than a lot of the work that a lot of us do. And that is engaging with people, trying to give good information. And so my work, certainly you're right about the building blocks. I think that's true of so many professions, is engagement, information, trying to get people to participate in decisions.
All right, there's so much more that I could keep talking about, but we do have some questions, and I don't want to leave our people out on the questions. So first up, let's go to Taylor Love. Taylor is an EKU freshman, and Taylor is wondering, what is it like in India? Obviously, it's been a while since you were there originally. Did you go back after your original visit?
I've been back several times, and in fact, I was back just a couple of years ago. Well, it's impossible to summarize a country in a few sentences, Taylor. It was just India for me was mesmerizing. It had everything in it. This I can remember the scents, the smell, the flowers. I can remember the markets with all the fresh vegetables there. I was able to travel the countryside and I've gone back several times. I've gone to tea plantations. I've seen the beaches of India. India is, the one of the world's largest democracies. So it really fascinates me with how they have evolved. India's the cities are like any city with magnificent buildings, with cars, with industry, with noise. The villages are like villages where you have small groups of people who are kind to you, will give you their last piece of bread and their last cup of tea. I love India because it was my first country and because I still have friends there that I enjoy visiting. And it's enormous, hard to summarize, but I would encourage anyone, if you have an opportunity to travel, I'd be happy to give you some hints about if you ever traveled there, where to go.
All right, so you're going to be the travel guy. You could probably do that for most of the countries on the map. But all right, next up, Dale Morgan has a question. He says, I really appreciate the fact that you chose EKU because of multicultural student body. What would you say helped foster your affinity for diversity?
Wow, terrific question. And thank you, Dale. Part of it had to do with the times. Again, I was so lucky because I grew up listening to Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. and listening to the Kennedys and seeing the movements in the street. And as a child, I have to, I guess, give a nod to my church because I grew up singing that song that a lot of us might remember of a certain age, Jesus loves little children, red or yellow, black or white. Forgive my singing, but I believed that. And so then with that as a background and the context of the civil rights movement, I just couldn't understand how is it that we find so many ways to hate one another or to think that we're different, whether it's because of skin color or whether it's because men and women. I remember clearly when my mother got her driver's license, and there were people in the family who thought she shouldn't have a driver's license, that only men drove. And that, again, I thought, why is it that is it some women, you think women can't do what men can do? And when I came to EKU, I was so lucky to have so many different friends from EKU. But I mean, I had friends that were part of the football team and the basketball team. My college roommate was Black American. I just was lucky to have these friendships. And so I couldn't understand why wouldn't we all want to be part of communities and churches and schools and workplaces where there's all kinds of talent there? So for me, I just think I'm so lucky that it's just one of my most, my core values. And then I've been able to live a life that I have seen so much, so many different kinds of people. I had a professor at EKU who was from India. And, again, Dr. Norgland talking about the chaplain at EKU who really taught me so much about Hinduism and Islam and Buddhism. And so all those experiences just, come together to make us who we are.
Absolutely. Next question is from Michael Earl Hay. He says, a lot in the world has changed over the years. How would you advise young EKU students to prepare if they wanted to seek a career path similar to yours?
That's a great question too, because this was not the career path I thought I was on when I was at EKU, even though I had the wonderful opportunity to study abroad and it did plant a seed in me. but I certainly didn't imagine myself eventually joining State Department and the work that I did later, which I think means when you prepare, realize there's many different ways to serve. And so if someone's interested in a career in international affairs, there are many different ways to do that. There's not one path. You can work with international organizations like the UN. You can go the international service route in government like State Department or like Agency for International Development or CIA. You can work with one of our military branches, Save the Children, a not-for-profit charitable organization. So part of it is really knowing what you like doing and finding out what sort of the issues that you care about. So for me to, someone that's wanting to prepare for some kind of international career, I would encourage you to get familiar with all the different organizations that do all those different kinds of work. Do a lot of internships if you can. I had an internship at a maximum security prison. I had an internship with a home for the elderly. I had the opportunity, of course, with Mother Teresa and the Fulbright. And so different internships really helped me hone my interest. And so I think that if you are a person who loves agriculture, you can find an opportunity to do agriculture internationally if you're interested. If you are interested in rule of law or prison reform, there are jobs overseas working with State Department or working with other organizations that do prison reform overseas. And so, don't think about it of having to get a degree in diplomacy. Think about it getting a degree in something that you really love and then looking at those international opportunities.
All right, great answer. And our final question comes from Lisa Day, and this is a question that I asked you too. And she says, I believe I've asked you before, but are you writing your memoir?
I love the encouragement that I get from some of my EKU friends and colleagues about this. I certainly would like to. I'll be honest with you again. Like I said, I look at my life as chapters in a book, and I haven't got to that chapter yet. I think it takes a lot of guts to sit down and reflect on your life and to be able to put that to paper. And it's like any other professional experience, just like you, Dan, you can't wake up tomorrow morning and know how to negotiate with the Taliban about how to build a school for girls in Helmand province, which is what I did. It takes a little bit of experience and background and skill to figure out how to do that. And writing a memoir is the same way. I don't really know how to do it, but that's one of the things that I'm committed to trying to do this next chapter of my life.
And it's funny because you've talked about service, and certainly your life has been about service. And the thing that impresses me is that it continues today, even after your professional career is done. But you continue to serve, whether it's at EKU and the work you've done with us. I know you're active with Habitat for Humanity, God's Pantry. There are a lot of things that you are still finding ways to serve, even though your professional career has maybe has finished for now.
That's sort of what I think life is about. That's to make the world a better place if you can, and find how you can do that. And if we can't be of service, it makes it interesting for me, and it keeps me out of trouble.
Which is also a good thing. And I did want to mention too, study abroad had a great impact on your life. And I know that's something that you have continued to support here at EKU since, especially since you've gotten back.
Absolutely. I mean, who would have thought, again, this Kentucky girl from pretty meager means would have had the opportunity to study overseas in India. And I mean, it was really because of the Fulbright program and that commitment to provide students with opportunities to go abroad. And I really think that the more we get to know about other countries and the people that live in those countries, I really think that's the only way peace is possible in our world. The more you get to know other countries and people, you care for them, you realize they're just like you. And so I can't think of a better investment of time and money than study abroad.
We're running out of time, but I can't stop without asking you about this. You mentioned that a professor bought you your first suitcase and also your first camera. And I think that's got to be where the love of photography started. I was able to see your photography exhibit at Giles Gallery a couple of years ago. And it's incredible. Photography is something I guess you kind of fell in love with.
I did. And it's not something that until recently, again, sort of another chapter, started thinking more about. I had thousands and thousands of photographs in boxes. And then, I had undeveloped rolls of film. And then as we moved forward to, DVDs of digital photography. And so just in the last few years, with having retired from State Department now, and I've really been able to, as I started unpacking boxes, I started finding these photographs. And I'd like to focus more on photography too. But I always had a camera with me. And so, again, that first little Kodak Insta, whatever it was called, that was bought at the same time my first suitcase started me on something, a lifelong pattern.
Well, and certainly there have been a lot of patterns in your life. I do want to mention this because I know you won't do it, and so I'll toot your horn for you. Here are some of the awards that Dr. Alexander has received in her career. The Expeditionary Service Award, Superior Honor Award, and Meritorious Honor Award from the State Department, the NATO Public Service Award, the Medal for Exceptional Public Service from the Office of the Secretary of Defense, and the Public Service Award from the Maxwell School of Citizenship and Public Affairs at Syracuse University, and a lifetime membership in the U.S. Army's Special Operations Civil Affairs Regiment. Just to name a few. Very impressive.
Thank you. I've been lucky.
Well, luck probably had a little bit to do with it, but I think there was more to it than just that. A wonderful 44-year career in the State Department, and we have loved, and I have loved getting to hear the stories tonight. And there's more we could talk about. Maybe we'll have you back next year, and we'll continue the conversation. But certainly appreciate the time you've given us tonight.
It started at EKU, and I am so grateful.
And that's what we love to hear. Dr. Deborah Alexander, thank you so much for being with us tonight.
It's been terrific. Thanks a lot, Dan.
Dr. Deborah Alexander, our guest tonight, she is EKU graduate, and as you've heard, went on to do many, many, many things after she left EKU. And another reason that makes us all proud to be part of the EKU family. A couple of things I want to remind you about before we wrap up tonight. Again, next week, we have our next edition of the Colonel's Kitchen. That will take place on Wednesday, the 28th at 8 p.m. on many of these same locations. It's a special Kentucky Derby edition of the Colonel's Kitchen. Chef Sang will be whipping up some of your Derby favorites. Dana Bush and I will be along. That will be at 8 o'clock on Wednesday, the 28th. And our next Spotlight Series will be on Tuesday, May 11th. It'll be our final Spotlight Series of the year, and we will be talking with Alumni Board President Amy Jo Gable, who is wrapping up her second term as Alumni Board President, and also be talking with Bob Sullivan, who is our President-elect, and he will assume the presidential duties on July 1st, talking about the Alumni Board, what it does, and how it serves you, the alumni of Eastern Kentucky University. So that will wrap things up for us tonight. A special thanks again to our team behind the scenes who always helps get things done. And we appreciate you, as always, for tuning in. Until next time, from the Campus Beautiful, I'm Dan McBride. Good evening.